When people talk about the greatest receivers in the history of the Green Bay Packers, we all know that number one is Don Hudson, and it's not hard to see why. The man was a Hall of Famer who was head and shoulders above everyone else, leading the league in receiving yards 7 times, leading the league in receptions 8 times, and leading the league in receiving touchdowns 9 times, all while being so good that he got his number retired. And when Hudson retired, he had 488 receptions for 7,991 yards and 99 touchdowns, which was number one all-time by a comfortable margin in NFL history, with second place in receptions at the time being Jim Bennon with 190, second place in yards at the time being Jim Bennon with 3,309 yards, who, by the way, was the only other player to have over 2,000 career receiving yards, Hudson at nearly 8,000, and second place in touchdowns being Johnny Blood with 36. It's like Hudson was playing a completely different sport. So there's no debate as to who the greatest receiver in the history of the Packers is. There will never be anyone in the history of football to be on Hudson's level in terms of dominance and just how much in front of the pack he was. But the number 2 receiver? This is where the debate gets really interesting, because you've got a lot of guys to choose from. Some would say it's Donald Driver, who played 14 seasons in Green Bay and finished as the all-time leader in receptions and receiving yards with the team. Some would say it's Sterling Sharpe, the Hall of Fame wideout who was the best receiver of his era, not named Jerry Rice, and had his career cut way too short. And some would say it's Davante Adams, a man who probably ends up in the Hall of Fame one day, and a man who had over 8,000 yards with the Packers. But a lot of people would point to the man that you've been watching this entire time, Hall of Famer James Lofton. Lofton is one of the best to ever play the game, and in his 16 years in the NFL, Lofton amassed over 14,000 receiving yards, which, at the time of his retirement, ranked number 1 all time. The Packers chose Lofton in the first round of the 1978 NFL Draft, and in his 9 seasons with the Pack, he made it to the Pro Bowl 7 times, had over 1,000 yards receiving 5 times, and had just a hair under 10,000 career receiving yards, all while making it onto the All-1980s team. Some would say that in the mid-80s, the receiving duo of John Jefferson and James Lofton was up there with one of the best duos in NFL history. Bottom line, Lofton was a heck of a receiver who is remembered today as an NFL legend and as a Packer legend, and one of the few bright spots on some really bad teams in the late 70s and the early 80s. And he's in the Packers Hall of Fame and the Pro Football Hall of Fame for a very good reason. However, his tenure with the Packers was not perfect by any means. And in 1986, which was just a bad season in general for the Packers in so many ways, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, Lofton was a part of a controversy that nearly 4 decades later deserves a deep dive today, especially with Green Bay taking on Washington on Thursday Night Football if you're watching as of this video getting released. Because during Week 10 of the 1986 season, Lofton decided that the game was over before the final whistle blew, and decided to just leave the game on his own. And this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, the biggest black eye on Lofton's otherwise incredible tenure with the Green Bay Packers. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, hype up that video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you've never heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for hyping the video up, and for joining this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the moment that seemed to be the beginning of the end for the wideout in Wisconsin. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand the importance of the game at hand, as well as how the game itself was going and how the season was going thus far for the Packers. It's November 9th, 1986. It's Week 10 of the NFL season, and as we're in the second half of the year, we find ourselves at Lambeau Field for this NFC matchup between Green Bay and Washington in a battle between two teams going in completely different directions. In terms of the good, Washington entered this game at 7-2, tied with a handful of teams for the best record in the NFC, and being tied with the New York Giants for the NFC East lead, thanks to the third best offense in the conference. In terms of the bad, let's talk about the Packers, because they were looking like the worst team in the conference, and if it wasn't for the 0-9 Indianapolis Colts, they'd be the worst team in football. Green Bay defeated Cleveland in Week 6, and other than that, they lost every single game, so they entered this one at 1-8, and it's not hard to see why they were bad, seeing as they had the worst defense in football, allowing 249 points through 9 games, or nearly 28 points per game, and scoring just 111 points, or just over 12 points per game, which was the worst total in the conference and the second worst total in the NFL. Their point differential of -138 was in another stratosphere compared to the other teams in the conference, and was only 2 points better than the Colts for the worst in the NFL, who again did not win a single game at that point. At this point, many Packer fans were rooting for the team to lose out so they could get Miami quarterback Vinny Testaverde in the 1987 NFL Draft, who was thought of as a surefire thing. It was that kind of season. There's a reason why people consider the 1986 season to be the worst in the history of the franchise, at least since the merger, as seemingly nothing went right, and you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. So it's safe to say that when you've got a 7-2 team that looks like one of the best in football, going up against a 1-8 team that looks like one of the worst in football, that the 7-2 team is going to win the game. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened, as when the final whistle sounded, it was Washington who won this one, taking it by a final score of 16-7. Now, Green Bay's defense, for all intents and purposes, did not play too poorly. Yes, they allowed some plays, but they allowed just 6 points in the first half, and they held Washington to just 87 yards rushing on 2.5 yards per carry. Seeing as the Packers had the worst defense in the NFL, the fact that they held their opponent to 16 points and 254 yards of offense was quite good. The offense, however, a completely different story. Obviously, the 7 points is pitiful. They only scored on the opening drive. And as you're watching the lowlights of this game, you might be noticing a certain someone who is not getting the ball whatsoever. That player, as you might have guessed, was James Lofton. In 1985, Lofton was a 1,000-yard receiver and was 6th in the league in that category. In 1986, it was a very different story because of the way the offense was structured, thanks to offensive coordinator Bob Schnelker no longer being there, and because of how bad his quarterbacks were, mainly Randy Wright. 9 weeks into the season, and Lofton had 41 catches for 511 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was outside the top 20 in receiving touchdowns and outside the top 20 in receiving yards. He was not getting those deep balls like he used to. And for the first time since 1979, James Lofton was on pace to have under 1,000 yards in a non-strike shortened season. There were some games during this season where he was basically invisible, including the previous week, when he had 2 catches for 14 yards in a 27-3 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it seemed like this week was going to be more of the same, as Lofton wasn't getting the ball. Not necessarily because he was on the decline, but because his quarterback and his offense just stunk that much. Do you want to know when James Lofton's first catch of this game right here was? It was with just over 4 minutes left, with Green Bay down 16-7. For the first 55 minutes of the contest, Lofton had no catches for no yards and no touchdowns. On the first 8 drives of the game, Lofton had done nothing, which meant that over the last 115 minutes of gameplay, Lofton, one of the best receivers in football and a perennial 1,000-yard man, had 2 catches for 14 yards. He was frustrated, not just because his team was losing and was absolutely staking on offense, but because he wasn't getting the ball at all during this game right here. And so, after the Packers' final drive resulted in a failed 4th down conversion, with Washington taking over in a 16-7 game with just over a minute left, Lofton decided that enough was enough. and he just left. Seriously. He just did the whole, screw you guys, I'm going home, Eric Cartman style, and went down the tunnel with 87 seconds left in the contest, leaving the game and leaving the stadium before the final whistle sounded. The fans were understandably frustrated, as this season was nothing but a horror show in so many ways, with this game just adding to that. And as Lofton was running into the locker room, the fans were heckling him, saying things like, "There's still a minute to play, and the game's not over yet." But that didn't matter to Lofton. He never really addressed why he did it, neither in the immediate aftermath of the game, nor afterwards, only saying, "I don't have anything to say." So while we can only speculate on why Lofton left this game early, I think it's pretty fair to assume, considering the previously established context. Add in the fact that the Packers were reportedly trying to shop Lofton around, though they couldn't find any suitors for their asking price of a first-round pick, and yeah, Lofton was super frustrated about everything, with this seemingly being the year from hell for him. And I don't know what's worse, the fact that Lofton did this and quit the game before it ended, or the fact that somehow, even though reporters picked up on this and the fans picked up on this, no one on the Packers picked up on this. Not only did they have no idea that Lofton existed on the field, seeing as the man wasn't getting any targets and wasn't getting any touches during this game right here, but apparently they had no idea that he existed off the field. Head coach Forrest Gregg, who is definitely worse in Green Bay as the man in charge than he was in Cincinnati, was completely oblivious to this, saying afterwards when asked about it, "I wasn't aware of that." Linebacker Brian Noble echoed those thoughts, saying, "I didn't even notice it." And wide receiver Walter Stanley, joining the club, said something similar, saying, "I sure don't know anything about it." And I have to say that there is something funny about a receiver being livid that he feels invisible to the point where he leaves early, and no one notices the fact that he left. The 1986 Packers for you in one screenshot, ladies and gentlemen. This team was a dysfunctional mess in every way. After this game that you've been watching, things wouldn't get better for the Packers or for Lofton. The Packers finished the year with a 4-12 record, setting the franchise record for most losses in a season, and a record that, amazingly enough, still stands to this day. Lofton found himself on the Los Angeles Raiders in 1987, as he finished the 1986 season with 64 catches for 840 yards and 4 touchdowns, with the 840 yards being his worst total in a non-strike shortened season since 1979, and the 4 touchdowns being tied for his worst career total ever, as over the second half of 1986, Lofton had just 25 catches for 343 yards and 1 touchdown, with him seemingly being phased out of the offense despite getting open, thanks to the fact that his quarterback stunk and the scheme stunk. Obviously, it doesn't excuse leaving a game early, as you stay on the sideline with your teammates until the clock hits triple zeros. But it's not hard, considering everything we know, to see why Lofton was visibly frustrated. The Packers never addressed this. The Packers never punished him for this. And it honestly wouldn't shock me if Gregg thought that everyone else was lying about this and didn't believe that Lofton would leave the game early, seeing as no one on the team noticed this. Either way, this was quite the way for Lofton's tenure with the Packers to unofficially come to an end. Because on this November day in 1986, during this game between Green Bay and Washington, we learned the answer to the age-old question. If a disgruntled wide receiver doesn't get targeted and leaves the game early, and no one on his team notices, does he make a sound? Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live, and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters, who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.